Welcome to the Conversations That Matter podcast. My name is John Harris, and I have a guest with me today, Eric Rowell, who is, he's a local attorney in North Carolina, and he's gotten involved with local politics. We met at a conference, a year and a half ago or so. And one of the things that Eric does, which impressed me and something I want to share with my audience, is he really does take to heart the adage, think local and act local. And I'm going to read you a quote from Eric before he gets on and starts talking about some of his activities on the local level politically. But he said in 2016, the most depressing aspect of the presidential election isn't the candidates we have to choose from, but how many individuals seem to believe the next president will have a greater impact on their lives than the impact each individual can have on his or her own life. Start learning more about your local government prior to municipal elections next year if you want to make a difference in the election with real impact on your life. And man, I thought that was just such a good way to put that. Oftentimes we can get really frustrated with national politics and we want to go online and say something about what's happening nationally when actually our voice means a lot more on the local level. And so I'm going to give the floor to Eric. Eric, thanks for joining me.
John, thanks for having me. Really appreciate this. I know you do a lot of good work on the podcast, and you've had a lot of big names on, so I appreciate you carving out a few minutes for me.
Yeah, well, Eric, you're doing something that a lot of the big names aren't doing, and that's getting involved on the local level, and that's much more accessible for someone who wants to actually make a difference. So can you take me through your story a little bit? How did you get involved in Huntersville, North Carolina with local politics? And take me through a few of the accomplishments maybe that you see that you think, wow, that was something I never thought I would do, but here it is, it happened.
Yeah, sure, John. I mean, I for a long time now, I have been pushing folks to get involved locally. It's clearly, in my opinion, where you can have the most impact. So I started out like a lot of folks, just kind of a traditional, a Republican, never really super involved in college. In law school, I started getting a little more involved with, college Republicans and things like that. But it was not until well after law school, I think, that I really started focusing on the local. And so when I got out of law school, my first job was in a small town. And I started paying attention to what was going on in the small town, started reading the local paper, actually wrote for the local paper for a very short amount of time due to some legal threats that were made against some of the folks in town against the paper. But that was a very, I think, eye-opening experience for me because I was able to have an actual impact locally in that small town in South Carolina. And the example I always give is the town decided that it was a good idea to buy or to look into buying a local golf course that had kind of become run down. Membership was dropping, and for some reason the town thought it was going to be a good idea. And me and another gentleman spoke out against this at a town board meeting. And again, this is a very small town in South Carolina, so you have I think it was a 5-member town board with the mayor. Very, very few people pay attention or show up at local board meetings. So when one person, or actually in this case it was two, when two people show up to speak out against an item, that's actually a big deal. It makes a big impact. And in part because of my efforts and me writing about this and speaking out against it, the town ultimately decided to shelve that measure. And subsequently, the golf course was purchased by a private entity and has now since turned around the golf course. They've made a lot of improvements, invested a lot of money in it. It's a really nice golf course now. And thankfully, the town never had to spend taxpayer money to get involved. So that for me was really the start of my Think Local, Act Local involvement. And, I'm a big fan, I know you are, of Dr. Brian McClanahan. So I like to say that, I've been thinking local and acting local since before it was cool, since before, Dr. McClanahan has made it so popular. But after my time in South Carolina, I moved back to North Carolina and relocated to Charlotte and continued to focus on the local. I don't know at what point I solely devoted myself to local issues. But, I always kind of say the folks in Raleigh and the folks in Washington, D.C. just really don't really are not going to listen to me. I can send those emails to my senators and my representative in Congress. I can even send emails to the folks in Raleigh. The folks in D.C. really have no, they don't care at all what most of us have to say. Now, the folks in Raleigh, actually, I do know my former state senator, former state rep. I actually do know them. My current state rep, I have met a few times, know her. And so I guess to some extent, the folks in Raleigh would listen to what I have to say because I've built a platform locally, but still to a much lesser extent than the folks locally. And so, when I moved to Charlotte, I started getting involved. Charlotte's a really big city, but even in Charlotte, the example I always give is there was a pedicab ordinance that the Charlotte City Council was pushing 8-9 years ago, where they were trying to regulate out-of-town pedicabs who would come in for events like the Panthers games or big conventions that we would have. I think the Democratic convention. I believe it was maybe 2012. I don't remember, but the Dems came a few years ago, and I think in the lead up to that convention, the city council was trying to ban out-of-town pedicab companies who would come in, and obviously the pedicabs are just the bicycle-driven carriages that people will take around town. And I spoke out against that. I went to city council. I spoke to my city councilman, and I attended 1 or 2 city council committee meetings on this issue. And it was very interesting because one city council subcommittee meeting in particular always stands out. You had whatever it was, the transportation subcommittee met, 2 or 3 members of the city council. And you had a room full of folks. The vast majority were in the transportation industry. And we went around the room and actually introduced ourselves. And when it got to me, it was pedicab owner, taxi cab owner, big corporate media representative, et cetera. And I just said, I'm just a local citizen here that's interested in anti-competitive measures. And after that, I had a bunch of people come up to me because they were just so confused as to why I was there. But that I was able to help significantly, I think, reduce the impact that measure was going to have on competition, anti-competitive type issues here in Charlotte. And so, but again, that was me. I was just one person speaking out on that issue. And then, I've now just taken that to Huntersville, which is a suburb of Charlotte. Not a small town, but still small in the sense that only a handful of folks actually get involved on the, local election. You've got, a few old families that still kind of control a lot of the votes, so to speak. But we're a growing community, a lot of transplants here. And I'm doing my part to try to get people involved here in Huntersville, because we have an election this year. We have off-year elections every 2 years. So generally the focus is just not there for the off-year elections when you don't have a, congressional race or state house or Senate race or the presidential race. So at least here in North Carolina, the way our calendar works is the local elections are usually in the odd years. And so a lot of times people just don't pay attention. And I'm doing my part to try to change that.
Eric, I want to get into some of the things that you've accomplished, because the longest list you sent me, which by the way, I'm going to post this. If you go to worldviewconversation.com, I'll post the list you sent me of some of the accomplishments. And you're not tooting your own horn. You're just saying this is what kind of an impact one person can make. And as an example, I'm going to post those on this podcast episode. So if you go to worldviewconversation.com, you can find that. And I want to get into some of those, but I want to ask you, what is it about local politics that makes that make locals not want to get involved? I mean, you just kept saying over and over, not many people show up. And so when you show up, you can actually make a difference as a local citizen because no one else is there to, or if you're a few people are there to actually contradict what you're saying. So why is that? Do you have an answer? Or?
I can speculate. I don't really know why. I think there are a lot of reasons, especially specific to Huntersville. One reason people do not get involved for at least a number of years until after they've moved here is because they're coming from out of state somewhere. They're moving into town. They may not have a base of friends or family that are already involved. So you're moving into a big suburb of Charlotte. Charlotte, takes up most of the space in the local paper, the local news reports. Huntersville or the other suburbs make the news if there's a major crime event or some type of major corruption in the local government. Otherwise, the vast majority of the news is Charlotte. So if you're new to town and you turn on the news or you open up the Charlotte Observer, it's going to 90% of it's going to be Charlotte centric news. And then it's just when you're in a community and you're going to community events or you're hanging out in your neighborhood, most of your neighbors aren't involved locally either. So when you start talking politics, whether it's on social media or in your neighborhood, you're either going to be talking about Charlotte or, what the president has said or what's going on in Washington or to some extent Raleigh. I don't really know why that's the focus because, again, like Dr. McClanahan talks about oftentimes, the government that's closest to you is the government that has the most impact on you. And
right.
And as everyone knows, federal government has shut down a few times over the past few years. And people kind of joke, well, no one notices when the federal government shuts down unless you're an actual federal employee. You work at a park system or something like that. There's very little impact that the most of us feel. And same thing, if your state government were to shut down, which I don't think that's really something that happens often. Generally, if a budget isn't passed, you have measures in place to continue funding it at prior levels. So the state governments don't necessarily shut down in the same way the federal government does. But if your local government were to, let's say, stop working, your trash probably wouldn't get picked up. The water bill, water issues may pop up right away. There are a lot of issues that may start impacting you immediately. No police. That would be a big thing. People would all of a sudden maybe notice that there are no police on the streets, no fire protection for a lot of towns. Depends on how your fire department is set up locally. So, I'm just doing my part to try to make people aware that these are the issues that affect you the most. And obviously a big one here locally as well is property taxes. So most of your taxes that you're paying are going to be local. For most of us, at least. Most of us middle-class folks, the biggest portion of your taxes are going to come from the state and local government. So, this past summer when we passed a budget here in Huntersville, whether or not to raise property taxes was a huge issue. And, you've got trash fees, you've got vehicle fees that they tack on the property taxes. So, I don't really know why more people don't get involved. But I'm doing my part to try to change that because, again, the issues that impact you the most are going to be coming usually from your local government.
That's right. And it's also a stepping stone. I don't think you're using it that way necessarily, but if you want to get involved with bigger, or I should say more, bigger, I guess is the word I'm going to go with, bigger government issues. If you want to go to Raleigh and then DC, then you're going to have to probably get involved at the local level at some point, because not everyone's a Donald Trump that can just go from the business world and jump to the presidency. That just doesn't happen that often. So, this is interesting to me. You're a conservative guy, and so far you've given some examples that are about opposing measures that were not fiscally conservative. But when you get to Huntersville, walk me through that a little bit, because there's a big list here you sent me, and there's a bunch of stuff, including some social justice stuff and some more, socially conservative measures that you were, or against social conservative measures that you opposed and so forth. So how did you get involved, and how can that serve as a blueprint for others who might want to do the same thing? And then what kind of success stories do you have from getting involved there?
Right. Well, I would say for me, I moved into Huntersville, and, usually when I move to a new town, one of the first things I do, I register to vote, maybe get the library card, signed up at the local library, and then start looking at who is on the town board. And so that's the first thing I did here in Huntersville, started checking out who the board members were, because when I lived in Charlotte, I didn't really know anyone up here. So once I moved up here, I found out who the players were on the town board, who the mayor was, started just trying to read the local paper, there really wasn't an online news source that focused on Huntersville. We had one local blogger who does a good job of covering some of the local northern suburbs here in Mecklenburg County, but no one solely devoted to Huntersville. So I did the best I could to try to get to know who the conservative players were on the town board, and reached out to one in particular. Had developed a really good relationship with one particular town board member, have actually helped him on some of his campaigns over the past 2 years. And so, that's really how I started to get involved. I keep up with the agendas. Usually we have 2 town board meetings a month. So I've gotten on one of those lists to make sure that the agendas are emailed to me so I can review those. And then I started writing. We have a local weekly paper, like a lot of towns do. No one was really covering the opinion. There was hard news coverage for local town board meetings, budgets, et cetera, but there was no one really providing any opinion on the local government. And here in Huntersville, we had, again, a local blogger that did a great job covering another small town. So I reached out to the paper. It worked out. Wrote a column for about a year and a half, usually about once a month, covering, specific issues in Huntersville from more of an opinion perspective. But a lot of it was just fact-based. So, one of the first things that I got in trouble for, and I consider this a big success story, the town of Huntersville actually kind of owned a gym, and a gym / pool. And we were using taxpayer dollars to provide management of that facility, paying a lot of the capital expenses. And to me, that jumped out immediately as problematic. I mean, I don't think, call me crazy, I don't think local government should be in the business of running swimming pools and gyms. So I started questioning that. And one of the articles I wrote for the local paper just simply pointed out, hey, taxpayers are funding this facility in large part. The folks running that management company really were not happy, just that I pointed that fact out. They, in my opinion, they like to operate under this charade of this was a private facility. And so once people started, learning more about how much taxpayer funding was going into this place, some of the local politicians, some of the local town board members, I think, started paying a little more attention and got involved to the point where it was about 2 years ago, the summer of 2017, they actually brought up for a vote. Finally, they said, look, we've got to put out for bid the management of this facility. So, it's not, we may not have gotten to the point where we sold off the entire facility, but at least now we're in a much better position where the taxpayer dollars are not just being wasted on this facility. Where we've got a new management company that came in because the town board voted to bid out the management services, which was great. And so the facility is being run a lot better. But again, that was one of those things initially I was told, hey, this is an issue we really don't touch. Things are going okay over there. You got a lot of the swim moms. You've heard of soccer moms. We have a lot of swim moms locally who are happy. They're voters. Let's keep them happy. Let's not really ruffle any feathers. Fortunately, I'm usually don't listen to advice like that. I'm pretty persistent when it comes to following up things that I probably could maybe be better left alone. But that was one of the early issues when I got involved here in Huntersville that I think I was able to definitely make an impact on. And again, that's something that's now, it was previously costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now we're in a position where we're at least breaking even, potentially earning some income.
Tell me about, because I know we talked about this, I don't know, was it a couple months ago? Maybe it was last year. Time gets away from me, but this may not have been one of the biggest success stories you've had, but I remember there was a social justice activist on the public art committee. And you stopped the town from partnering with this social, so just because this is for those who aren't big on the fiscal conservative, not that they're not fiscal
right.
conservative, but social issues usually capture attention a lot more. So tell us that story. What was this person doing, and how did you put an end to the town partnering with this individual?
I probably shouldn't, talk about this too much because, somebody may listen to this and say, we gotta do something about that now that we know that we stopped that person from getting on. But bottom line was,
well, don't say something you'll regret then. If
No, but this is a perfect example of, again, why it is so important to pay attention to what your local government is doing. Just to give you a kind of a perspective for folks who are listening, the Huntersville in North Carolina, our town budget, we're roughly 35 to 40 million, somewhere in that range for an operating budget. So obviously, compared to, your county budget, like here in Mecklenburg, it's about a $1 billion county budget. And obviously the state budget far bigger, and federal government is just, there's no telling how much money the federal government actually spends every year. But the point is, even with the $35 million operating budget, there is so much waste and abuse and fraud that takes place. You can spend a large portion of your week just focusing on the fraud and abuse that takes place in a small budget. So one of the things that the town board had started looking at doing a few months back, actually maybe it's about a year ago, that the topic of starting a public art committee came up. And again, call me crazy, I don't really think that government should be involved in funding public art. Now, some people, a lot of folks, there are pros and cons to public art programs. And so, but personally at the town level, I was opposed to this, specifically the way it was being set up. And so the town ended up starting this. It was I think a contested vote, but the town started a public art committee under the premise that there would be no town dollars spent towards this. But the thing is, anytime you have town staff that are acting as liaisons for some committee, or you have town space being used, there's always going to be resources. And the way these things always start is just like the federal income tax, for an example, it's never going to tax the middle class. Federal income tax is never going to impact those who are making under a certain amount of, it's just going to tax the rich, right? We know how that went. Right. And so that's why I think it's so important to get involved with your town government, because if you can stop a lot of these things at the outset, then you can keep them from ballooning or growing or inflating later on, because, the government only grows one direction. I mean, government only gets bigger. Government never gets smaller. So what I tried to do is to stop the public art committee from forming. I mean, look, if a group of citizens wanted to get together, my suggestion was, if these folks want to get together and have a private art committee that wants to meet and make recommendations to the town for, art that should be funded, sculptures, murals in town for whatever, that was fine. But I didn't want the town to be directly involved. And so, that was a contested vote. We lost on that. And I started paying attention to the minutes from these meetings. And maybe the first or second meeting, there was already the suggestion that, hey, let's partner with this local artist. She can come in. We've got some funding from one of the local hospitals. They're going to fund, they're going to give us $40,000 for this unspecified art project. I looked up this person, and it was abundantly clear that she was a what they call social justice warrior. And so immediately I saw that this is going to be problematic, that some of the themes that she was going to be pushing in whatever art the town ended up funding would probably be something that a large number of citizens in town would probably either object to or have a problem with being displayed in the center of town. Because, this is not just going to be some piece of art celebrating the town or the history of Huntersville. And so all I did was bring to light this person's social media, some of her past work, and some of the themes that she's been involved with. And fortunately, the town was able to distance themselves from this person and cut off that partnership. And again, I mean, I know this person is an artist, and a lot of artists obviously don't do what they do for free. And so I'm not necessarily celebrating that she didn't receive taxpayer funding. I just use that to point out that this is something that if you're able to get in at the ground level and you're able to stop this stuff, it's a lot easier than for as opposed to this art being installed and then having to take something down, because then you're a censor, right? Then the town is censoring art. If we have some art installation put up in the middle of the town. And that's one of the arguments I always made is I said, to the town board members, do you want to be in a position to be on the dais saying yes or no to certain art? I mean, famously, we had the jar of urine with a cross in it, for example, that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with. What if, for example, we have an artist here in Huntersville that provides something similar and wants to use taxpayer funding to display something like that? Do you as a town board member want to be in a position to be saying yes or no to this art?
Yeah.
So that was something that I was able to get involved with, and we were able to stop it. The Public Art Committee still meets, and I'm sure there will be another example of this, at some point. But again, if you're involved with your town and you follow the agendas, you follow the committees, these are the kind of things you may be able to identify in your town.
Now, you say that there's town employees that are concerned about the waste of taxpayer dollars, but they often can't speak out because of fear of retaliation. And so you end up being a voice for residents who happen to be employees that are kind of gagged because they would.
Right.
And that's that's, I think, why I feel a little bit of a kinship with you. And I'm in a different area with at least my public presence, where I see in this, at least currently, I don't know if I'll stay here forever, I hope not, but in the sort of greater evangelical world in academia, there's kind of that same sense. I get messages from a lot of professors and people inside academic institutions, students who are like, man, keep going, keep saying what you're saying. Like, we feel this way, but we can't say it. And you're doing that for folks in Huntersville. And so, I mean, I'm sure they're greatly appreciative. Now, you have a Facebook group, 475 members. What's the name of that Facebook group? And is there a website with that as well, or just the Facebook page?
Well, yeah, that's I guess another one of my quote unquote accomplishments. What I did is, because I was never a social media person, I was on Twitter, but never on Facebook. One of the few people, I guess, our age who had never really gotten on Facebook. But once I got asked to leave the local paper, second time I've been kicked out of writing for a local paper, because one or two advertisers, they may have pulled their ads from the paper. And local papers are in the business of making money. So I got asked to leave the paper. I said, well, let me start a website because I want to continue to advocate for issues. And I started a Facebook page and then, the separate group. The group is Huntersville Politics, but it's a closed group. So if you've got any listeners in Huntersville, North Carolina, or, surrounding areas that want to try to join the group, fantastic. But you can also follow most of the stuff I post on my website is also at my Facebook page, and it's just Eric Rowell. And my website is ericwrowell.com. Again, definitely going to be extremely boring to most of your listeners unless they're really fascinated with local government. Because again, all I focus on is the town of Huntersville. So, but that's something I started. I started this group because there was a vacuum there, and I tell people all the time, whatever your town is, start that group, that town politics on Facebook. And I do the best I can to try to provide a platform for all the residents of town. This is not just a quote unquote conservative Huntersville politics group. I let in members of unaffiliated Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, because I'm just trying to. The majority of these issues locally are not partisan issues. We're not. The town board's not going to be talking about gun control or abortion. Those kind of things. Town board's talking about contracts with vendors. They're talking about taxes, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in this kind of thing and there's no one in your town currently really focusing on local issues, then be the one to just start that group, invite folks in town. And I've got a large number of folks that I've never met in person that have joined the group, and I do my best. I post the agendas when they come out every other week. I try to post about town events or the elections that are actually going on this year. This is an election year. So one of the things I've done, like I'll send out candidate questionnaires so that I can post to the group, things like that. And so, I've always gotten a good response. 475 may not sound like a lot, but for a town the size of Huntersville, where you only have, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people turn out to vote, that's actually a good, good sized group.
Swing an election that way. Yeah. So, you're an average guy. You're not getting paid to do this. This is just kind of what you do in your spare time, I guess. And your concerns.
Yeah. To be clear, I get no money for this, and it takes up a lot of time. Right. And a lot of my family members frequently question why I continue to do these type things, and when am I going to start getting paid for this? So yeah, just to make sure your listeners know, if you're getting in this for the money, this is not the path for you.
You don't have like a Patreon or anything like that, do you? Or,
no,
okay.
I'm not as smart as you. I have not gone down that path yet. Maybe I should.
Well, yeah, maybe in the future, for citizens who are concerned to give you a little something, you might want to monetize that. But right now, I mean, you're just doing it because you're a concerned citizen, you're a husband, you're a father, you live there, and these things affect you. And it would just be so much better, I think, for concerned citizens to get involved on a local level where they actually have more of a chance of not only getting heard, but making a difference. Not that you shouldn't be involved in understanding what's happening at the national level and voting and so forth, but you're drowned out a lot of the time, and people will listen when you go to a town board meeting. So yeah, I appreciate having you on. I also think, I was going to throw this out there for some of my listeners, but from just a Christian worldview perspective, government is government's responsibility is pretty narrow. It's to punish evil, and there is a sense in which government is supposed to promote good. But government, the things that are going on right now, especially on the federal level, but even as you said on the local level, are just crazy. They're outside the scope of what God ordained government to do. And without fleshing all that out, this is a place for, I think, even Christians to get involved, to put an end to governments basically acting like God and thinking that they can impose on the family and impose on the church and impose on other institutions, on business, when that's not their job. It's not their function. And so I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on to just encourage people that, you're a local guy and you started a website and you're making a difference. So appreciate it.
Yeah. And I could go on and on all day about some of the issues where I've had an impact because that's just what I'm passionate about. But, to your point about the Christian worldview and how this impacts Christians, I mean, just one example, the town gives a lot of, well, not a lot, but it gives tens of thousands of dollars to local charities. And some of those charities are good charities. But the point is, as government, every year it's a fight about how many charities should we be giving to. And a lot of folks want to give to even more charities. But as you know, the more that government crowds out, or the more that government gives to local charities, then that has usually a detrimental impact and effect on contributions from, local neighbors, because they see, well, look, the town of Huntersville is giving taxpayer dollars to this charity.
Right.
So they're good. They're well taken care of. They don't need my help now as a member of the community. Look how much taxpayer dollars they're receiving. So that's another area where, it's a small item in the budget, but every year I'm one of the only people pushing back saying this is not a proper function of government. We should not be giving money to charity, because force, it's still, it's taking money from others by force and giving it to your select charity.
The commands in Scripture, I think in the New Testament, especially the one and others that are given to Christians for the treatment of other Christians, but even expanding that into how we're supposed to treat our neighbor. These are personal commands. There was never any concept of giving to some kind of a central authority to then distribute. It was always personal. And that's what I think Christians have traditionally done throughout time because of the New Testament, is they set up, all the hospitals, and it's a privately funded charity. And Salvation Army. I'm sure some of these charities probably have their Christian roots that even Huntersville is funding, but it was a personal thing. It was never meant to function this way, this impersonal kind of, we're just going to put all our money in a pot and someone else is going to, by force, really, we're not even voluntarily doing this, and they're going to distribute this to those who need it. Talk about being lazy and kicking back and not even getting, there's no actual care for someone on a one-on-one, face-to-face level. And I don't like that at all. I think we ought to be getting involved if we're going to do that on a personal level. So yeah, you make a great point there.
Look, the easiest thing in the world is spending other people's money and taking credit for it. And that's what politicians do best, especially with the charities. The one thing they always want to do is to say, look how great this charity is doing, so of course we should give even more. You're the bad guy for not wanting to give them anything. We should give even more of other people's money away. But then my favorite thing I always like to do is to ask those board members individually, well, how much money have you personally contributed to that charity? And usually I'm met with some type of, either no response or some type of personal attack for why I even question that. But
so you've actually asked
that's
this at meetings. You've said, hey, how much are you giving? And then they get upset at you.
Well, I know I've definitely asked online. I don't, because I try to avoid attending as many meetings as I can. But yes, I've asked that specific question, and one response from a local town board member essentially was, my wife and I give money, all kinds of money to charities, and it's none of your business how much of our money we've given to this one charity. So essentially, it's a way to avoid answering the question.
Yeah.
But the point is, that's always a fun thing to do if you're involved locally and you go through your town's budget, and then you see your town is taking money to give, to charity. Always email the mayor and the town board and ask, individually, how much money have you given to that charity over the past year?
That's right.
Because again, it's one thing to take money from other people and spend it, but then it says a lot when that politician also may be giving out of their own pocket.
Yeah,
but again, I could go on, and the bottom line is, just get involved locally, find out who your local officials are, find out when your elections are, start paying attention. We're in a technological age now where so many local meetings are streamed online, so you can really follow the video of these meetings, and it's done live. So you don't have to wait for 2 or 3 weeks for minutes to come out from a meeting. I mean, you can watch what goes on. A lot of times you can comment on the video stream of the town board meeting. You can get involved with Twitter, things like that. And a lot of town board members monitor these things. So they'll go back and see the live stream of their town board meeting the next day, and they'll see the comments, and they'll respond to those, because again, you're in a smaller setting here. You're not in a congressional district with 700,000 constituents. You're in a town board situation where you may have less than 5,000 voters who actually participate, or some small number. So they're going to be a lot more responsive. So again, you can really make an impact. And it's so sad. If you really start digging into your town's budget, you'd be shocked at how much waste and fraud takes place at a local level. This is not just, we don't just need to drain the swamp in Washington, to borrow the president's phrase. I mean, there's plenty of swamp to be drained locally. And again, it's something where you can really make an impact if you just start getting involved.
Well, Eric, I appreciate it. You should write a book. Your website's ericwrowell.com. Figure out a way to monetize this. So
I need to, yeah.
When I put it up, I'll probably air this in a few days, but yeah, maybe by then you'll have like a Patreon or something up there. But anyway, Eric, I appreciate it. God bless you with what you're doing. Until next time. Have a good one.
John, same to you. Keep up the good work.